And we're back.
We are. And this episode, I want to talk about how and why people like us, Black people specifically, are policed in literally every sphere of our lives. Roots and rigor, rigor and flow. Roots and rigor, rigor and flow.
What do you mean by policed?
Let me speak from my space, the research space. On more than one occasion, I have, many more than one occasion, I have found myself in situations where saying things that I believe are self-evident, obvious, and a fact, and many people in our communities believe are self-evident, obvious, and a fact, are heavily and strongly resisted by people around us. Okay.
So when you're saying policed by who?
White people.
Okay. So straight in there, let's go.
Like one half of my lineage, white people.
Okay.
Are not able to hold many of the things we think, feel, say, and do. I say my lineage because, as you know, I see myself as Black mixed race, but I learned about this policing first in the family I grew up in, and specifically from the white side of my family.
Okay, so we're going to get into that.
Okay.
But before we get there, I kind of want to dig a little bit deeper, because when I think about the spaces that you're in, and I think about your politics, which tend to be obviously left-leaning, I'm wondering, is it only a certain kind of Black person, in your view, that is policed? And the reason why I say that is because very recently, Kemi Badenoch was made the leader of the Conservative Party. She's a Black Nigerian woman.
Yeah.
And I found that when she was voted in, I felt like a lot of Black people were policing her.
Oh, I mean, there's people police people left, right, and centre.
Okay, then.
Black people also police Black people.
Yes.
There's no doubt about it. And we should definitely talk about that.
Yes.
I feel like we need a whole separate episode on that. But in this instance, I'm referring to what happens when you encounter like white institutions or white majority institutions. I don't think there's such a thing as only white institutions in this country anymore, but some of them arguably look very only white. But often they're multicultural and there are many people in them. But if you look at who is represented in positions of power, it's primarily white people and white men specifically. And white women, to be fair.
Especially nowadays.
Yeah, definitely. And so like, I guess in terms of research and research cultures, I think, yeah, you see a lot of policing. But I guess I'm curious, like, you're asking me these questions in the entertainment industry. Do you see, is what I'm saying resonating with you in any way? Do you see that in the entertainment industry?
Listen, we've been policed. Going back to the beginnings of recorded music, we were policed and put in particular categories. Your music is not welcome here in the mainstream if you're going to sing about this or talk like this or wear this. We're going to create the urban category before even what we might consider like more modern music, contemporary music. You know, Black people had their own, it was like race records, you know, specific record labels for Black music. They had to tour on specific circuits. One of the circuits was called the Chitlin Circuit. The Chitlin Circuit was a network of performance venues across the southern and Midwest areas of the United States that emerged during the Jim Crow era, which was a period in American history where segregation was legal and systemic discrimination was rampant. This was the era of whites-only shops, schools, public transport, bathrooms, drinking fountains, and entire neighborhoods. So you can imagine African-American musicians were not allowed to perform at white venues during this time. So the Chitlin Circuit emerged in response to that. So these venues were often run by Black businesses and were welcoming to African-American musicians. Everyone from Otis Redding, Sam Cooke, Billie Holiday, Ray Charles, Ike and Tina Turner, and even a young Jimi Hendrix in his early days as a sideman or session player. So that, for me, when I think about policing, I know we're talking about policing of Black thought,
Yeah.
And we're not talking about the rapper from The Roots. We're talking about the thing that comes from our minds as Black people. But I am a strong believer in the fact that thoughts lead to action means that when our actions are policed, and they often are, and there's many examples of that, it's a direct resistance to our thinking, because thinking leads to action. So if they can police our actions, they are policing the fruits of our thought.
Well, and or another way of saying that is they're policing the entirety of our beings. It's not just our thoughts. It's not just our actions. It's our spirits. It's our ways of knowing. It's our ways of being. It's our ways of making sense, including religious and cultural ways that are, not understood sometimes by people who hold power in our institutions. I had to ask you about the entertainment space because when I said that, when you asked me what you mean by Black people or white people, I was like, is she acting brand new right now? Is she newborn? But I was like, okay.
It's the producer in me.
Okay.
So the producer in me is just trying to make sure that where I'm sort of interrogating what you're saying, because I feel like some people listening might have that question.
Yeah.
Because the bottom line is every society polices. In fact, that is what makes a society, right?
Yeah.
It has all of these rules and regulations about how people act in this group.
Yeah.
And if you stay outside of those lines, or you stray outside of those lines, then
the repercussions
are felt.
Can be severe.
Now, the issue I find with when I think about, should I say, Black people in white systems, is that we're often the outsider by virtue of being a minority and by virtue of being recently arrived. When you think about Caribbean people coming across in the 40s, right? Late 40s and 50s on boats like the Windrush. And then you think about, some of the Nigerian people from my community coming across in like the late 70s and 80s. We are new to this culture in the culture's eyes. Yes.
So long as
I'm not
you're
justifying.
Thinking, no, I'm not.
I'm just trying to understand.
Okay, I understand. I completely agree with you. Where I was going to go was, this is very, even that statement is a statement that is heavily influenced and loaded by race and how we understand race, right? That's a British context.
Yeah.
White people pitched up in the Americas and weren't necessarily policed or treated like outsiders. True. They pitched up in Southern Africa as colonizers in the context I came from and were kind of lauded and That's also true. Upheld. So, I mean, of course, there were resistances and there were those kinds of things. So certain people are subject to policing when they are newly arrived. Yeah. When expats roam around the world today and land in the context where I come from, they do not get policed. I would argue quite often they get adored, pedestaled, and at best, gentle ridicule if they turn up with some naivety and some even quite ignorant, stereotypical statements. We still respond with a kindness and laugh it off as Black people do.
That's true. That's true.
But yeah, that was where I was going to go.
You know what, right? And I agree with everything that you're saying. I think what I'm trying to dispel is that I know for a fact there will be people listening to this episode who will say some of those things and ask some of those questions.
No, completely.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But from my perspective, this has been going on since the transatlantic slave trade and colonialism.
And
before, right?
Yeah.
It's people saying that your way of worshipping is demonic, and this is the right way, Christianity or Islam or whatever it is. People coming and saying your way of dressing is savage.
Yeah.
And you have to dress like this.
In a civilized,
appropriate way.
Pure even.
Absolutely.
Respectable way.
Whilst doing the most despicable, brutal, disrespectful things to those same people. Do you see what I mean?
100%.
So for me, I agree with you fully, and I'm just throwing that out there. Yeah, for the discussion.
Yeah, totally. And I think, maybe the helpful thing to qualify is that this episode is on where we see it showing up in the spaces we're part of today or in the culture. Like we've recently had this really famous example. So we had Serena Williams performing at the Super Bowl in Kendrick Lamar's show in his piece. And it took us back, didn't it? Because she did the Crip walk, right?
Yeah, so Shall I go?
You go for it. You say.
Yeah, so Serena Williams is from LA, Los Angeles, and from a black majority area of Los Angeles. One might say one of the rougher black neighborhoods in LA. And there are two main gangs in that part of America. There's the Crips, who wear blue,
and
there's the Bloods, who wear
red.
And one of the dances came from that gang culture, and it's called the Crip Walk.
Yeah.
It's a really good dance.
I love it. A lot of my teenage years were spent trying to figure out how to Crip walk.
Yeah. Did you ever figure it out?
Oh, yeah.
I didn't.
Me and a bunch of girls, Nigerian girls actually, that I went to school with, we were always doing dances and figuring out dances. And actually, I think it was some of our friends, male Nigerian friends, who like really sat there and made sure I got it on a half-term break. So yeah.
Nice. I never managed to master the Crip walk, but I've always appreciated the dance.
Yeah.
And there's some controversies with that dance because in 2012, during the London Olympics, after she won gold, she celebrated by doing the Crip walk.
Yeah.
And when the media
got a bloody hold of that, you can imagine the headlines.
She was called classless. That dance has no place
in Wimbledon. Anyway, people got hella respectable British.
Absolutely.
Shamey.
Not even just British, American.
Oh,
it was
Americans?
Fox News had headlines about her doing this dance. I think to myself, like Wimbledon is a borough in southwest London. It is one of the richer boroughs with very upper middle class people. And Wimbledon itself is a very white middle class space and a white middle class tournament. And I kind of thought to myself, the moment that she did that dance, I know that the majority of that audience didn't have a bloody clue what that dance pertained to. They had none of this history.
None.
You know, I'm sure there would have been one
woke white one.
Yeah, there'd been a woke white one, a woke liberal who would have known. And then there would, of course, have been the older person who was probably like, yes, I'm a historian of gang culture in the United States of America. Absolutely. And I did visit a village once upon a time in
urban village.
It's an urban village. And I think the natives did a dance quite similar to that, actually, Mabel.
Was it called a Crip walk?
Yes, but maybe it had a slight extension to the name, actually.
An extension?
It
How?
felt more like Cripolata.
Darling.
It was the Cripolata walk, I think.
Cripolata, okay.
Yes.
So you should write that in some textbooks and that will be, therefore, history told, done, finished.
It's done.
And in the ivory tower.
Absolutely.
Forever.
Darling. Forever, Nutty.
And how many awards shall we give you for the history you have written?
And so I think about that space and they wouldn't have even known.
Yeah.
And this was blasted across the world as being this really classless, savage, uncivilized, gang inappropriate dance, right? Fast forward, 12 years, 13 years later?
Yeah.
And she does the Crip walk at the Super Bowl performance by Kendrick Lamar.
Yeah.
And I loved it.
It's like a boss move.
It was such a boss move.
When I realised it was
finger.
her, and I was seeing all these things, I was like, zoom in. Is that Serena?
It really was the queen herself.
Wow.
She did that.
It was a reclamation.
It was a reclamation. Now, I know some Black people watching that, because I saw some of the comments on social media, and there were a few Black people who were saying, I disagree. That is a dance associated with gang culture. It should not be glorified and broadcast on big platforms like that. And I guess it's very similar to the debate around the N-word.
Yeah.
Which, as you know, originally was a derogatory term used against Black people. Reclaimed by young hip hop people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
Within that genre of music. And then there was a big debate about that. I mean, I remember there was an interview between Maya Angelou and Dave Chappelle on a show called Iconoclast.
Yeah.
Where, Maya Angelou at the time was an elder. Dave Chappelle's a young comedian. He uses the N-word with great frequency across his shows. And she said, I don't like that you use the N-word. And he came back and said, well, we've reclaimed it. And they had a bit of a back and forth, an intergenerational back and forth.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's the same thing with the Crip walk.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I'm curious about how you feel about the use of the N-word, because I have never liked it, don't enjoy it. In the context I come from, grew up in Southern Africa, in Botswana, people just throw it around, and I'm always like, first of all, you're not American. I do get that the culture has been exported and all this stuff, but I don't know. There's just something about it that I just find like, I don't like it. I'm not into it. And obviously I know the history of it. But weirdly, this is probably a hypocrisy in me. I don't have that feeling about the Crip walk. Okay. And it's because I suspect there might be a privilege attached to it, in the sense that the N-word I had thrown around and near me. In South Africa, we have an equivalent, a K-word, in Southern Africa, that got thrown about in a derogatory fashion towards black people. Do you know the word I mean?
Kafir.
Yeah. So I guess maybe it's close to home. If I was from that part of the States and had seen family members or seen my community ripped apart, I think I might have a very different perspective around the dance being glorified. Yeah. But as it happens, I've received the exporting of that culture as a teenager and grown up knowing it as divorced from gang culture. It probably took me many years after I knew the dance to understand it was associated with gang culture. Yeah. So, it's an interesting one. What's your take on the N-word?
It's a difficult one because I came up in hip hop. I always say hip hop made me. It really did. It's my foundations. It's a genre that I love with every ounce of my being. I used to rap, released record, you know what I mean? Like it's me. It's really at the core of who I am. And yes, the N-word is thrown around quite liberally in hip hop.
Yeah.
I would say that it's weird because in the context of music, with the rhythm and the melody, it doesn't feel jarring.
I would agree with that, particularly amongst more conscious rappers, if the few that do use it.
Yeah. But then the moment you come out of music and you're just in a conversation where there's no music, there's no rhythm, there's no energy, there's no swag, and it's just someone saying the N-word, it feels jarring for me.
Okay.
Because I wasn't raised in a culture where that was the word that you used in general conversation.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
In common parlance.
At
darling. Wimbledon.
In Wimbledon, darling. So do you see what I mean? So in the music, it has kind of a rhythm to it. It feels natural, and I don't know.
It doesn't bother you. Or do you enjoy it? Like,
it's funny because, let me just... let me explain something, right?
Yeah.
So my background in hip hop, the stuff I liked was always conscious hip hop.
Yeah.
It was the stuff that was about Black empowerment, liberation, freeing your mind from mental slavery, power to the people, Black men treat women well and all of this stuff. That's the kind of stuff, Talib Kweli, Mos Def, Lauryn Hill, or it was fun, like Left Eye from TLC. You know what I mean? It was that kind of hip hop that I really loved. The feel good stuff and the thinking stuff. Yeah. More so than the gangster rap.
Yes, definitely.
But I dabbled. I liked some of the gangster stuff. I mean, I loved Tupac, California Love. That's my jam.
California Love. In the stand, California. California.
So I would say that for me, when it was used in the more conscious forms of hip hop, it felt appropriate.
Yeah.
I didn't feel a way about it. When it was in the gangster context, it felt loaded.
Very.
Just so loaded.
Because it was loaded with a gun that was probably smoking. Yes.
It really was. Yeah. And so I'm mixed about the N-word. I'm going to say that I'm mixed.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's talk about the N-word in the context of, I guess, your career or similar sorts of things, right? Ooh. So we're now talking in the abstract about, Serena and Kendrick and all the other madness we've seen. But tell me about your career beyond hip hop as a producer. Yeah. Have you seen people trying to express themselves or being policed around words like this, words in the culture?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it happens quite a lot. And I think one of the examples was a TV series that I produced. I was the exec producer on that show. And we had a guest on the show who was Black and a woman. And
are you having to measure your words?
I am having to measure my words.
I see that. I feel the caution, but that's good.
I'm being cautious, but I think it's something that we do need to talk about.
Yeah.
Because as Black people in these spaces, we often come up against these big walls.
Yeah.
And it can be really destabilizing and demoralizing. And I think some of this is what pushes Black people out of the industry. Because if you're consistently misunderstood, sometimes willfully misunderstood, and at times like quite clearly and violently resisted, it feels like there's no point.
That is 100% true and applicable in my industry too.
Right.
So I get why you need to measure your words.
Absolutely.
And yet I also get why we have to speak about this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the privileges that I have is that I own my own media production company.
Yeah.
So there's a kind of a slight freedom to speak a bit more openly, I think.
Maybe. I would love to come back to that question.
I could be blackballed and blacklisted and all the other blacks that are negative.
Anything negative is associated with blackness, it seems, in this system.
Anyway,
but yeah, go back. I was just noticing sensing your caution about how you were telling this story. So
absolutely.
But tell me what you feel able to in whatever. Yeah.
Absolutely. So this TV series had a contributor who was the main character in this series, and they were Black. And they'd been cast. So when we talk about casting, it's where you do your research to find who is the perfect person to tell their story in a particular series. So we did the casting process to sort through quite a few people, and we really loved her story. So we selected her. It was signed off by the commissioning editors and the client, which was a brand. And everyone was good to go, really excited. We did the pre-interview with her. And then we were preparing to do the actual interview that would form the basis of the actual series.
So like on set, you were on location shooting with
No,
this
we
person.
were getting ready to.
Okay.
But one of the things you have to do before you can start shooting with a person is a due diligence.
Yeah.
And that due diligence is checks on the person's background. So it's like background checks, essentially.
Yeah.
And in that background check, you check all of their social media.
Yeah.
You check searches for that person. So what comes up when you search that person's name, what images come up, what's been written about them, just so that you don't find out when you release the film that this person is an axe murderer or a paedophile or whatever. Do you know what I mean? Or they've had some scandal.
It's just going to be... a hothead that you can't manage and say some wild stuff. Your brand is now associated with this.
Precisely.
Right?
So you have to do your due diligence, and I completely understand that. And we do that all the time in the industry. Now, during those extensive checks, it turned out that our contributor on their Twitter account, going back, I think something like 5 or 6 years, had a few posts, one of which was her with her younger brother. And he had obviously achieved some milestone. I think it was his birthday or something like that. And she put on the post, congratulations, ma, N-word. And then there was a few other posts like that, but it's the kind of use of the word that happens between Black people, you know?
Like a camaraderie.
It's a camaraderie.
Kind of affection.
Absolutely.
The context to that matters, right?
It matters hugely.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, me and my producer, we saw that and we understood it. We were like, oh yeah, she's just this is her and her brother.
She's just busy being black.
She's just busy being black.
But the producer was also black.
Absolutely,
I'm assuming,
absolutely.
for that to be
absolutely. So
Okay.
we were just like, yeah, it's busy being black. Yeah, and then we brought it to the thing, and then instantly, all the white people on the call were just like, yeah, no, we can't have that. Just using the N word.
So what did they try and cancel? What happened?
Absolutely.
When they said
there was a whole thing about not having her because of these tweets from her past. And we tried to make them understand. Well, we tried to get them to understand this was in the context of camaraderie between her and her brother and her friends. It was just a term of endearment that they were using between them. And I think the audiences would know that if this episode were to come out and someone were to do a 5-year search of her Twitter history and find this stuff. You know, most people understand that black people have been using this term of endearment going back to the 80s.
Yeah.
Right? But it wasn't the case. And there was a lot of resistance. And then there was a back and forth. Me and the producer were like pushing, saying, no, that we don't think that is a good enough reason to not have that person there, because there is a context to those tweets. And so after some meetings, the client came back and said, look, if she deletes all of those tweets, we're happy to keep her on.
So did she
But
delete
this was
them?
after a weekend of me just feeling...
I remember that time, so I want to go back to what was going on for you at that time, my recollection of it.
Yeah.
But just before we do that, do we know if she deleted them?
Yeah, I had to help her do it. She didn't know how to do it. She was like, I don't know how to delete these tweets. I didn't even know how to delete the tweets. I had to go on Google and search, you know, how do you delete tweets from Twitter, which is now known as X, but it wasn't X at the time.
And how did she respond to being asked to delete them?
She was actually really good-natured. You know,
Really?
She was just excited to be on the show. She hadn't even remembered that those tweets even existed or that she'd said them. She was like, oh, okay, yeah. So she was really good-natured, really open. And I just went through with her. I said, look, here's the links to all of the tweets.
Yeah.
And here's how to delete them.
Yeah.
Let me know when you've done it. And then she did them. I checked back and they were gone.
Okay. So thank God she was good-natured and it all passed smoothly.
Yeah, because there are some black people out there who'll be like, fuck every last one of you.
Yeah, 100%. Whether we agree with that use of the term or not, it's irrelevant. People are allowed to speak how they want,
how they
right?
speak. And the problem is, if with that black person who says, fuck it, is that then they get removed from the show and their story doesn't get told.
Precisely. And this was the point I wanted to get back to, because earlier you said, I have a hunch that people leave the industry because of this stuff. Mm-hmm. And what I know for sure was you were so disturbed by this back and forth and you having to go and ask permission from essentially white male execs,
Yep.
that you were like, I will walk off this production.
I really felt that way.
I know you would have.
Because she was the only black person in that entire series.
Yeah.
And this is how we get erased from the conversation.
Yeah.
And I was like, if she gets removed from this, then from my perspective, as someone who's in this industry, you know, as a black queer woman, I don't know that I could stomach doing a show where the one black person gets cancelled for something like this.
100%.
I don't know that I could stomach it or live with it.
Yeah.
And I was really ready and willing to get the money, return the deposit and keep it moving.
So you were really ready to
go.
To stop, return the money.
Yeah.
And give back the deposit on this. What was one of your biggest projects?
Absolutely.
Budget-wise?
Thankfully, we were able to reach a conclusion, a compromise, should I say.
Yeah.
We were able to reach a compromise. And she remained a contributor in that series and it came out, which I'm really happy about because the final episode I think is really brilliant, powerful. And I think seeing her as a role model for young black women was just brilliant. It was such an empowering episode and I could see how if you were a young black woman looking at that, it would really motivate you.
But I do think what's critical though is what you said, which is that it involved a compromise.
Yes.
And that is so often what it means for us, for black people and other minoritized people to have to navigate systems where we're just are not represented in positions of power. Listening to you telling that story, I was reminded of a story I was told by someone who's become a friend and a collaborator recently, who similar to me, does work around community research, putting marginalized or overlooked groups at the forefront of knowledge initiatives. And this person had told me about how they were working with a group of trans researchers, and those researchers were doing work with and for and by their own community members, right? Mm-hmm. Everybody involved was trans. Mm-hmm. Within research, we have something similar to the kind of due diligence thing that you go through in production, right? We have our version of that is ethics board, right? Before any research goes ahead and you go out and you talk to people or whatever thing you're doing in your research project, you have to get ethical clearance, right, to go ahead. And that ethical clearance safeguards all sorts of things, like makes sure nothing illegal is happening, makes sure people participating in the research aren't, harmed, probably protects universities from PR disasters and all litigation. Sorts, and litigation, all sorts of things like that. This friend of mine was telling me how this group of trans researchers had put in an application to this university ethics board, and the ethics board rejected their application to conduct the research on the grounds that it would be harmful to the trans community. And there was absolutely zero trans people on the ethics board. And the people doing the research were trans people within their community in a project that whole community had designed together.
Wow.
And I think, when you were telling that story of your contributor who was, I suppose, silenced because they said something harmful, like I hear this kind of, I don't know why in that project of yours, they chose that path. We can talk about why, but one part of it sometimes I think is like a well-meaning paternalism. Like people want to do the right thing and want to say the right thing and want to protect everyone. But sometimes they're making decisions for communities they really know nothing about.
Absolutely.
And a well-intentioned...
Or they think they know something about.
Actually, that's the more dangerous thing.
That's the
You're
more
right.
dangerous
It's
one.
they think they know something about.
Yes. Because they have had some tangential connection, maybe through music they love or through
books
a friend
they read.
or books they read. And that, of course, makes them the authority over the actual people who live that every
reality.
day.
Yeah. What do you think in the example that you gave was at the core of that desire to...
There was no maliciousness to it at all. It was a type of due diligence. It came up. And at the end of the day, when you do due diligence or, these background checks, you have to flag certain words.
Yeah.
So there will be, swear words, there will be hate speech words.
Yeah.
And obviously the N word in certain mouths is hate speech.
Absolutely. In certain mouths.
In certain mouths, right? It's hate speech. But in ours, it's not hate speech. It doesn't tend to be hate speech, right?
It was in that instance, the specific context, which matters. It was endearment and banter.
Right. But the word itself will always be flagged because of its connotations,
of course,
with hate speech.
And it should.
And it should.
It should.
Absolutely. So I think in that situation, there's a part of me that understands it from that commissioning perspective and wanting to protect your brand's reputation, wanting to be above board, making sure that when the episode comes out, you've always got that one person who looks at the contributor and then does a deep dive search into their history on all the platforms and finds that one tweet from 100 years ago and says, look at this person, they're a racist.
Cancel them.
Cancel them. I can't believe that your channel is putting out people who talk like this.
Who condone racism.
Who condone racism.
Yeah.
I don't know why I've suddenly
I don't know either.
That accent.
But I joined you in it.
I did. And maybe that's... anyway. But it's a protection, right?
Yeah.
They're trying to protect themselves, particularly because the last few years has seen a lot of people being cancelled, programs being cancelled, and so on and so forth. So I get it. But in this instance, it felt like an overstep. And this is the reason why when we talk about representation, we're talking about representation at every level. Because you need people in positions of power who understand some of those cultural sensitivities, who are able to represent the viewpoints of some of these more minoritized groups. Otherwise, we are forever going to be policed and kept out.
100%. But also the other point it raises is it's never just about representation alone. It's about the values and the views of those that are represented, because we've seen it in our political system.
With Kemi Badenoch, right? Kemi Badenoch. So that's an example of it. We have a black woman as the leader of one of the most powerful political parties in the UK. And yet, as soon as she was elected to that position, they were suddenly like, oh shit, maybe that's not the right kind of black. That's what people, essentially that's what we're saying. It's like, when we said representation, we didn't mean this.
This is about diversity of worldview, right?
There you go.
Because within the context of her party, she's singing from a very old hymn sheet.
Absolutely.
Right? But, when people talk about representation, often they're not just talking about skin color or a gender or something. They're talking about a set of values, a set
I don't
of
think
worldviews.
everyone understood that until that happened. And then suddenly people were saying, but you've been asking for diversity.
Yeah.
It doesn't get more diverse than a black woman at the helm of one of the biggest political parties in the UK.
Yeah.
And then suddenly it was like, okay, what do we actually mean by diversity and representation? What we mean is values.
Yeah. In that kind of example that you gave me, where you came to a compromise, but it was nonetheless a compromise.
Yeah.
Can you see a better way forward? What do you think that commissioners and institutions in your field need to prevent something like that from happening, or prevent it from being a compromise?
It's interesting because it's kind of like yes and no. These things are always going to be flagged in the background checks. There's no two ways about it. And I don't want the N word removed from the words that are flagged, because the bottom line is if there is a neo-Nazi person using that word, I want them found out before they go on screen spouting their bullshit.
Yeah.
And giving platforms to people like that. So I think the due diligence background checks are important. I agree with them. I think they should definitely continue. I think what we do with the results of it needs a bit more nuance.
Yeah.
So I feel like at the stage where things have been flagged, I think it's important to have in the room cultural consultants to explain what might be going on, and that what appears to be hate speech actually has a totally different context. And then it will take some bravery on the part of the commissioners or whoever it is, the client, to say, okay, going to put this series out with this person because we've got the context for why they use this particular word. And if there is a backlash, we're big, we're powerful, we can stand firm and put out whatever we need to put out and counteract it with whatever. I don't think that the default should be to silence and erase.
Yeah.
Because in that moment, they didn't just erase the word, they erased her celebration of her brother.
Yeah. Oof. Yeah.
That's the problem.
When you put it like that. And we also have to not infantilize the audience. I've heard you say that before, right?
Absolutely.
You can't, an audience can discern denigration from camaraderie.
Absolutely.
So you can stand by that as a commissioner. And I think, it's about having cultural consultants. Or another thing I would love to see happening from the conversations I've had with you is just audience insights. Like we can bring together a focus group. If people don't know and it's truly contentious and we need to suss something out, we can bring together focus groups full of black people and other people of different races to see how they respond and get some actual insight before you make a decision like that, right?
Yeah. And I think the problem then is that, as anyone who's worked in production will know, you are time strapped.
1,000 miles an hour.
You're budget strapped, and often you go for the quickest solution rather than the best solution. We've spoken about my experiences with the policing of black thought, black action. How have you seen that play out in your space, the research space? Judging by that look.
If you were watching this, you would have seen a heavy side eye.
If you're not,
I hope you feel it in the long pause.
Yeah. I wish there was a sound for heavy side eye. Oh, maybe that's the sound.
Maybe that's the sound. I have more examples that would probably cost me to speak about. And so, like you, I have some hesitation even raising this. And yet I feel like it is critical to raise because I see very capable, amazing people in the research space who probably exit, leave, or have a serious decline in their mental health and well-being because of really not being able to speak and fully be who they are within academic institutions. And I would say I struggled with that a lot when I was doing my PhD. I think one of the very recent examples that I've encountered, I have to say with me, they mostly manifest when I write. I really feel like the pen is a powerful, powerful tool.
Absolutely.
And I think I've come to understand in this life, actually well before I became a researcher, that my words or the written word that I put to paper has such power that it can cause severe harm to me if those words land in the wrong hands.
Ooh.
I first learnt that in my own family of origin. But that's I don't know, maybe that's a story for another day.
No, I think you should tell the story, because that is the beginnings of you realizing how dangerous your words can be.
Okay, it's a bit of a long one. Let me give you let me give you the abbreviated version.
Yeah.
I think I said in an earlier episode that I left home at 11. And I left home to go from Botswana to Belfast, and I was sent to live with family members in Belfast. All of my family members were white, so they came from my father's side. In many ways, was good with the adjustment because I'm an adaptable person, but it didn't mean I didn't struggle with the adjustment. It was really hard to go from a black majority context to a white majority context where people had never seen someone who looked like me. Some of what was hard was that my family home and my family environment, my relatives I'd been sent to live with were not used to someone like me. And so there were all these very subtle ways my otherness or the way that I was different came up. I think the one that really gave it away for me was this question I once got, which was, what does it feel, well-meaning again, what does it feel like being the only black person in your school?
Not black.
You know, and it's black when it's whispered and follows or preceded by this long pause that your body knows without anything being said that something shameful has been spoken. And I did not associate blackness with shame. And I grew up in a context where when people told you, like I said, the K word in our neighboring country was thrown around liberally, right? And when you heard that, you called it out. You either laughed it off with fellow blacks because you were never alone. There was a vocal opposition. And I had no one around me that looked like me to either laugh it off with or to stand in vocal opposition to this thing around.
You were alone.
I was alone. And so one of the things that happened was on one of my weekends there, when I had time off school, I wrote back home to one of my best friends this letter. And in this letter, amidst all my other updates about life, I put, by the way, I want to say that I think my family member is racist. So I put those words on paper. All I know is that I never finished that letter. I left it half written with many things in it. That was only one line in this letter. Oh, at some point I must have found that letter, ripped it up into tiny pieces, put it inside a plastic bag and put it in a waste paper bin. And this family member must have gone through my waste paper bin when I'd gone back to boarding school and pieced. And I say the letter was tiny pieces. I mean tiny pieces. And it wasn't because I thought it was wrong to say I saw racism. I pieced it, I threw it away because I was tired of writing the letter. It seemed out of date and I was going home soon on a holiday. So I thought I'd catch up with that friend.
What, in the FBI?
In the Karening.
In the FBI CIA? What?
Yeah. So they pieced together this letter. And I remember them walking into my bedroom saying, can we have a conversation? Sitting me down on the bed in this room. And I'm thinking, what the hell is going on? And they presented this torn up letter and staged this confrontation with me about the fact that I had said that they were racist. And this was, this is when I first learned, I didn't know the language for it, what white fragility was. this was, followed by, how dare you? I can't believe after everything I've done for you, because you've always had to do something to rescue the poor black child, right?
You're always
you're always in deficit. You're always in receipt of saving and saviorism from someone. The upshot of all that was that I felt it was untenable to stay with my family. I felt deeply unsafe. I didn't have that language for it as a child, but I ceased to have contact with my family in that country because of words I'd put on a page. And it took me ages to be able to reclaim the ability to write. I was so fearful of writing because when you're a kid and that happens, it's like a death. You're cast out and you're on your own psychically, spiritually. That is like a death. And so I used to fear, in my PhD, this became a big thing. I feared writing on the page. I feared it because I thought, am I going to get kicked? Subconsciously, will I get kicked out of this university? Will I be intact after this? It was the most painful reliving, but necessary reliving, because in that process of writing that thesis, I reclaimed so much of my power and so much of how I'd been silenced.
I love that.
As a kid.
How did you break through to be able to write that thesis?
Therapy. I worked with a therapist that specialized in racial trauma, who could say, because I don't want to say it was just my family back, in Belfast that were a problem. My family back in Botswana were a problem. They did not necessarily affirm me in the ways I wanted to be affirmed at that time. And so...
Not just wanted to be affirmed, needed to be affirmed.
Needed to be affirmed.
Yeah.
And so, for years I had walked around thinking I am the problem. And this is pre-BLM when suddenly people started... then we were able to have some conversations in my family. But for 20-something years, I was the problem child, right? And so it took a therapist affirming and validating that was wrong. But what really, I think, in a way, what pushed me as an adult to seeing how wrong it was that's those same family members. Before I was married to you, I was married to someone else. And when that wedding happened, I wanted to invite all my family, and I was going to invite those family members. And in fact, my parents said, "Oh, it will just be awkward. Don't invite them." And I said, well, "I don't have a problem inviting them." They said, "Don't. Just don't. It will be awkward." So I didn't. But then what happened was they wrote a letter to my parents 20-something years later and said, "We always thought your daughter would have grown up to be ashamed of what she said. Calling someone racist in the 21st century is just about one of the most..." What was the word they used? Basically, one of the worst things you could do or say to someone. I was like, well, how about being racist?
You're racist. You can be racist in the 21st century or the 18th.
Racism
is racism.
Yeah, and they were affronted that they could be racist when we're all basically racist. We're all brought up into a society, all of us, even us who have all the lingo and whatever. You have to unlearn and you have to undo.
Absolutely. I'm really sorry that you had to go through that, because at that stage of your growth and development, that, as we've seen with the PhD, can be the difference between sailing through and being held back.
Yeah. I was going to say some platitude that, it's for the best, but no.
It's not for the best.
That PhD took me longer because I had to work through all of that. And I dare say I would not do the work I do in the world today were it not for those formative experiences. The one other thing I'll say is that's one stark example from when I was young, but I've encountered it so many times since. And in fact, I encountered it really not long ago when I was commissioned to write a piece by an organisation who seemed to love what I do and love what I represent and loved the early plan I submitted and yes, and then discovered that actually, if I actually spoke honestly, they didn't like it. And I encountered a lot of defensiveness. It's only that, thank God, I've worked through things with my PhD that I kind of stood my ground and also picked my battles. What am I willing to do? Because fighting that battle compromises your health.
Yeah.
And you can't, it's not every time you do that or you won't even be in your industry.
Yeah. The battles are real,
They really are real.
Oh, God. It's the war within and the war without.
Oh, yeah.
It really is.
That's exactly it.
Do you know what I find interesting?
Yeah.
I see a lot of links between you saying that the pen was a powerful tool and was obviously very much feared and resisted by those around you, but you still used it anyway to still say the things you needed to say. And I find so much similarity between that and hip hop, because what you've got is a generation of young people in an unforgiving, hostile environment where they are disadvantaged in so many ways, sociologically, is that the word?
Socioeconomic status, you mean?
Yeah,
or
so
their
socially,
class in terms of socially excluded.
Socially, economically, in terms of class, and all of those sorts of things, and yet they were able to take the pen and write themselves into history. Where hip hop is now the number one genre in the world, listened to by everyone, incorporated into all the other genres, rock, pop, soul. It's there, jazz, right? It's become the dominant music of popular culture. So much so that if we go back to the top of our episode, Kendrick Lamar at the Super Bowl, one of the biggest audiences the Super Bowl has ever had, featuring Serena Williams' Crip walking, which is a dance that's also associated with hip hop.
Yeah.
So I find it interesting that the pen can also rewrite our stories.
100%.
You know, and it can be a tool for resistance.
100%.
Music, research, your film scripts, your whatever it is, the pen is a very powerful tool. Even now in this age of AI, I still think that the pen is a very powerful tool.
Yeah, it's about a refusal to be silenced.
Absolutely.
A refusal to play small, refusal to be denigrated through every part of your being. That's how we keep our power.
Absolutely. So use your pen. Use your pen.
And use it widely.
Yes.
Widely, wisely, and widely.
Wisely and widely, yeah, both.
Just kind of shifting gear a bit. We've talked about the power of the pen. Do you have any advice for younger or maybe even older creatives, writers, people in your field at any stage about how to navigate some of the scenarios that you have or attempts at silencing or policing?
Yeah, I think my thing is you've got to keep going.
Yeah.
I know it sounds maybe cliched and maybe that's not what people want to hear, but you absolutely have to keep going. There's no two ways about it. You've got to put one foot in front of the other. You've got to write what you write. You've got to think whatever the hell you want to think. You have to use your brain is your own. You know, I mean, they can take away things from you. They can take away commissions from you. They can take away, you know, access to certain audiences from you. They can take money from you. But what they can't take away from you is your spirit and your mind. And so I think you have to continue to think widely, to think critically, to write whatever it is that you want to write and tell your story on paper. And find people, find your team of people who have all of the different skills that it will take to get your idea onto the page, onto the screen, onto out of the mic and onto your podcast or whatever it is, right? Build your own networks. It's how we've always done it historically. You know, that's the reason why we have the grapevine is there for a reason, right? We've always been talking to each other. We've always worked together as a collective. And I think we need to tap into that more and more. There are so many incredible Black people, Black businesses doing incredible things together as a united force.
Yeah, 100%. And in a way, like even something like podcasting, it's like a medium that's accessible to all of us, right? I know that there's lots of corporates in that space and being discovered, but we can just turn on a mic and speak our truths.
That's
now.
what we're doing now.
Yeah, you can get on and create content as an influencer. Yes, we know the platforms are taken over by these wild people right now, but you can. And in fact, it's more important than necessary in certain ways, right?
Absolutely. As someone who's written and researched at the highest levels, I mean, it doesn't get higher than a PhD in academia. Dr. Walker.
Yeah, well, that's very flattering. There are people who've written much more than me, academics and non. But
what I'm saying is
Yeah.
that you've written at a level that gets you a qualification.
That's true.
Called a PhD.
Yeah, that's
and
true.
I think as far as qualifications go, I don't think there's a higher qualification than that.
In the system, no, there is no
In the
higher
system.
like as judged by the system.
As judged by the system, yes.
And not necessarily the people.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
So having written at the highest levels within that system, what advice would you give yourself to young researchers in that space?
I think it would be very similar to yours, you know. Our voices are desperately needed in these spaces. And I think the thing that I would say is that the violence you can feel in response to writing your truths, spoken or unspoken,
There's a clue in there.
is real. You need to validate and affirm that first, the way I was lucky enough to be validated and affirmed. And you need to write for yourself. You need to write to heal the pain of the scenarios that you have navigated, but write in a way that means you're also resourced, because there are mental health and well-being implications to these things. That means look after yourself, whatever that looks like. Have creative and passionate things you do. If you're taking on heavy writing, make sure you, I don't know, my thing was go to Afrobeat dance class while writing this PhD, because I needed a space for like unbridled joy while I was processing. I think for me, I kept in mind I needed to write for the younger version of me and write for... to validate myself in the ways that I did not feel validated by the adults around me, right? I had a mentor who was a big fan of Kristen Neff's self-compassion. You think about self-compassion as this soft, cuddly thing where we're all wrapped in cotton wool, but she has another concept called fierce self-compassion, where you back yourself, you kind of almost parent yourself. And so that's what I would give myself in those moments. Compassion when writing got hard, when the system's response to my writing got hard. And then a kind of fierce parenting that was like, you can do this. You've got this. You will write this. And even if you end up just writing it for you, it's what you need. And I'm here for you.
I love that.
I think we all need to develop a bit of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. That's a really beautiful way to end out the episode.
Thank you.
And as always, you can contact us at rigourandflow@gmail.com. That's RIGOURANDFLOW@gmail.com with your questions, your thoughts, your feedback. We love to hear from you, and we will be answering your questions in an episode this season. So definitely stay tuned. All of the resources we've mentioned in this episode will be included in the show notes. And if you're watching this on YouTube, in the show description.